In order to style the main content, we start from the Google logo. By inspecting it in the Elements tab, we can see that this is an image tag, the source of which is a URL pointing to a page within the google.com domain. Also, we can see that the width of the image is 272 pixels. That's all we need to know. In our code editor, where we previously added the logo image tag, we can now specify the source as the one that we just inspected and add a Google-logo class to the element so that we can style it in CSS by setting the width value to 272 pixels. Back in the browser, and the logo is now there. As far as the search bar, we can see what style is applied from the DevTools. In our case, this style will be applied to the wrapper and not to the input element itself. This will be cleared once we have implemented the code for it. So the first thing we want to do is to remove any border from the input field inside the search bar by using the descendant selector. We are then going to add 1 pixel solid border of a shade of white to the wrapper, a border radius of 24 pixels and a minimum height of 44 pixels. And this is the result. Our search bar starts to take shape. You might have noticed the border is broken on the left top side. That is because the actual input tag contained inside the wrapper is overlapping, and having a white background by default, this will show. Let's get back to our code and set the input background color to transparent. As you can see, the overlap is now gone. We can now focus on the search bar content starting from the left. Inspecting the magnifying glass, we reveal it to be an SVG tag containing the image path. We already know what to do with it from the previous video, so let's go ahead and copy the outer SVG HTML, create a search-icon.svg file and paste the code into it. The focusable attribute set to false will tell the browser that when navigating around the page with the tab key, this icon should not be focused on. We then get back to the index.html file and add the image tag as the first element inside the search bar wrapper. Set the source of it to be the search-icon.svg file and give it an alternative descriptive text in case the image is broken. In CSS, we then target the image tag inside the search bar with the descendant selector and set the width and height to 24 pixels. And here is your icon, even though it's in the wrong position and of the wrong color. As far as the color, that can be inspected in the style tab. So we copy that value and assign it to the newly added field property inside the SVG tag for the search icon. Now the color has been updated in the browser. To vertically center the icon, we can tell the browser to display our search bar as a flex container where the content is justified with a space between value and items are aligned at the center. Nice, our search icon is now vertically aligned. Time to set the left margin now. Again, by inspecting one of the live bar divs, we can see a padding left of 14 pixels. This will be our search icon margin left in CSS. Much better, our icon is positioned exactly where we want it. Time to implement the right side of the search bar. This contains two icons, the first of which is a microphone. Again, this is an SVG containing different path tags responsible for declaring the shape of the image. As usual, we can copy the outer HTML inside a new SVG file, which in my case I have called microphone-icon. We repeat the process for the camera icon, copy the outer HTML into a camera-icon.svg file, and then add both microphone and camera as EMG elements right after the search bar input. We point the source attribute to the relevant file and give alternative textual description to each one. Hit the save button and get back to the browser. Well done, both the icons are displaying correctly. We only need to give it the correct spacing, so let's inspect the live version on the Google homepage. And from there, we can see that both microphone and camera have a 8 pixel side padding. At the moment, all image elements inside the search bar wrapper have 14 pixels margin left. That's because we previously declared that property so that the magnifying glass icon on the left had the right spacing by using the descendant selector. We can easily fix that by adding a class to the search-icon and move the 14 pixels left margin inside that class in CSS. Now the right icon spacing has been reset to a default of 0. Since there's nothing on the immediate left of the microphone icon, and we know both icons having a side padding of 8 pixels, that means that in between the icons, the gap will span for twice that size, and namely 16 pixels. The easiest way to implement that is by giving the camera icon its own class and setting a left margin of 16 pixels on it. Hit save and make sure that the expected result is displayed in the browser. Also, in order to figure out how much margin is on the right side of the camera icon, apart from the 8 pixel padding, we inspect the search bar once again with the DevTools, and from there we can see it having a right padding of 8 pixels itself. Again, this means the total margin will be 16 pixels, which we can declare in our camera class in CSS. Now the camera has a right margin of 16 pixels and all icons are perfectly positioned exactly where intended. As far as the input element itself, we can see this has a width of 443 pixels. Back in our CSS file, we update the input class to have exactly that width, and our search bar styling on page load is now completed. Time to style the two buttons below it. A quick inspection of the Google search button element reveals all the styles applied, which we can safely copy. Since both buttons implement the same styling, we can target all buttons inside the main element in CSS and paste the copied values inside it. Just to make it visually easier to compare with the live version, I'll update the right button text content from I'm feeling to I'm feeling lucky, which is exactly what you see on page load. And if I save the changes and check the result in the browser, I can now see the two buttons styled accordingly. The main section of the page is basically done, but we have one last thing to address: hover effect. The Google logo doesn't have any, but the search bar will have a bit of a box shadow as well as a white background color and a dark border. We are really only interested in the box shadow, but can copy and paste all the three properties into the search bar class, which we target in this case with the hover pseudo selector. Let's make sure our changes are reflected in the browser. Excellent. Let's now address the input elements when focused, and that is when we click on it. At the moment, the browser will default it to have a black outline. We want to remove that by specifying known as the outline value of the input field in CSS. Great, now only the cursor will be displaying when clicking on the input area. This though looks too close to the search icon if compared to the live version. In fact, by checking with the DevTools, we can see that the search icon has a right padding of 13 pixels. Let's add that class in the CSS file by updating the search icon style, and the cursor will now display in the correct position once we click on the input area. Since we're there, it costs nothing to make sure that our input font size reflects the one in the original version of the Google homepage, and that is 16 pixels or 1 rem if you prefer. We can quickly update that value in our CSS input style, and if we type something inside the input field, the font size will now reflect the one on the live version. Last thing is to style the two buttons on hover. Again, by inspecting one of the buttons, we can see a bit of a box shadow being applied, as well as some slight changes to the colors. We target all the buttons inside the main element, and thanks to the use of the hover pseudo selector, we can now once again specify the style to be the same as the one we have just inspected. And now the buttons will have a hover effect consistent with the one intended. Let's take a look at the whole page now. Wow, navbar and main content look a lot like the ones from the Google website, but there's a slight issue with the main content positioning. On the top, in the blue browser, you can see the original Google homepage. Below, in the red browser, is a replica. Vertically, they are perfectly aligned. The only difference are the account icons on the top. Since I was signed into my Google account while taking the screenshot, and the X icon inside the search bar, which appears only when typing something inside the input field. This will be implemented with JavaScript and is beyond the scope of this episode. Apart from that, everything is positioned exactly where we wanted. If we compare the two versions side by side, though, we can see that our main content is too far up the page, and by inspecting the live version, this reveals an empty div used as a spacer, having a height of 100% minus 560 pixels. The exact value will be outputted by the calc function based on the viewport height. If we save the changes and get back to the browser to compare the two versions, we can now see them to be exactly the same.